First of all, I am Mona Hill with Community Affairs here at EBMUD. Got a couple of housekeeping things before we get started on today's presentation. First, I'm going to let you know that this is being recorded. So the entire presentation will be recorded and later posted on our website. Please, if you're from another agency, please feel free to rename yourself so we can know where you're coming from. And if you have questions, please post the questions in the chat and we will answer the questions, or well, Sophia will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. And then everything will be linked off the website at a later time. All right, Sophia, let me introduce our Director of Finance, Sophia Skoda. And then when you're ready, Sophia, we'll get started.
Sure. Let's go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your lunch hour with us. We really appreciate it. This is an opportunity for us to share with members of the public, what we work on all year and day in, day out. We've got several members of our finance team that are with us today, including Robert Haney, our Treasury Manager, Jean Chase, who is the manager of our budget group, Richard Liu, who is the keeper of all of our rates and charges, the principal management analyst in charge of that, David Mercado, who's the principal management analyst in charge of our capital program, Cindy Vong, who works also on our budget team at this point, has been assisting us through this, and others, including Karen and Bernadette. So I just want to thank you all for being here. Jack Flynn from our new business office, who helps folks that want to create a new connection to our system, is also available. So we want to be here to answer any questions that you might have, and hope that you'll find this interesting and informative. So with that, I think Mona's going to go ahead and share the first slide. So while she's pulling that up, I'll just start with what I usually like to say when I'm talking to folks that might not know that much about EBMUD, and that is that not everybody in our service area knows that we are actually a not-for-profit special district. So many people think that we're like PG&E, that we're subject to the California Public Utilities Commission, and that perhaps we have shareholders. And the answer is no, that all of you that are members of the public essentially are our shareholders, and that your votes for our board of directors, a 7-member board elected by ward, by you, by the public, are the folks that essentially drive our mission, our vision, and the policies that we essentially operate under. So we've got responsibility for water and wastewater services under California's Municipal Utilities District Act, and we serve communities in both Alameda and in Contra Costa counties. The other thing that I like to say is that we really see ourselves as part of the East Bay and its history, and we are very deeply committed to its future. For those of you that don't know our mission, it is to manage the natural resources with which the district is entrusted, to provide reliable, high-quality water and wastewater services at fair and reasonable rates. And we're going to touch on that several times through this presentation for the people of the East Bay, and to provide, to preserve and protect the environment for future generations. So that's what we're here to do. Next slide. So the purpose of today's forum is basically to provide information and answer any questions that any of you might have about our budget and about our rates and charges, and we'll do our best with any other questions that you might have about water as well. So we're going to do a brief overview of EBMUD. We'll talk about our recommended budget and recommended rates and charges, and then we'll go through kind of a quick summary and where we are in the process with respect to next steps on the proposed rates and charges. So work on our budget starts in August and it ends in June of our budget years. Next slide. So on this slide, you'll see that the title says Celebrating 100 Years of Great Water, 1923 compared to today. So we actually will be celebrating in 2023 our 100th year. And you'll see in the top left-hand photo of the slide on the screen that you'll see a photo of the construction of our main water supply dam, which is Pardee Dam. And many folks think that our water comes from Hetch Hetchy, but that's the system that actually serves San Francisco and the peninsula. we have our own Hetch Hetchy. We think it's better than Hetch Hetchy, and it's called Party. And what you'll see on the bottom below that photo is a photo of kind of sections of pipe. I'm guessing that that's our parts of our aqueduct that actually bring the water from Party 90 miles down to the Bay Area. And you can see there the trucks from the 1920s or cars that were carrying staff and probably materials as part of our efforts to build the water supply system that now serves 1.4 million people. And on the right side, you'll see, no longer kind of sepia or black and white, sort of photos, but color photos of today and staff that are working on things like solar power to make sure that our facilities are running with as low of a carbon footprint as possible, and work by staff on meters, pipeline, folks that work in customer service, and then you can kind of see a picture of that dam face that's still serving us almost 100 years later. Next slide. So this is just a little bit of a shot of where does your water come from. So I'll start with a little bit of history about East Bay Mud. So again, we were created in 1923, 100 years ago, because local water sellers at the time were expensive and unreliable. So as you walk around the streets of the East Bay, you may see gate pot covers and other pieces of equipment that say East Bay Water Company, People's Water Company, Contra Costa Water Company. I see those in front of my house even, actually. And basically those were some of the main pieces of early East Bay Mud, and those were private water companies, essentially, that failed. Rapid population growth and severe drought at that time meant that they were not able to provide reliable service at prices that people were willing to pay. And that resulted in the creation of the East Bay Municipal Utilities District as a public entity with a board of directors that was elected by the public. And that name Party, he was one of the early governors of the state of California. And there's actually the Party House, which is just down the street from, where we are here at the district. On one of our calls this year, one of the folks that was listening in noted that back in the 70s, he had knocked on the door of the Party House, and Party's two daughters, who were quite elderly at the time, were still living in that home. Anyway, so we're about to turn 100, and we have infrastructure that actually we inherited from some of those old systems. So some of the systems that are still in service today are 150 years old. And because of this, our primary focus in the recent years has been investing in infrastructure. And as we get ready to enter our next 100 years, we want to make sure that we have everything right and ready to continue providing the high quality water and high quality service that we have been providing to the people of the East Bay. The top sort of section of this slide shows the Sierra Nevada mountains. Our water is primarily snow melt. About 90% of our water is snow that melts down and that we capture from our watershed in Party Dam. And that then you see there's Party Reservoir. That's a shot of the reservoir, not the dam face, which we saw on the prior slide. And then that water comes down through the McCullough aqueducts. And so we've got 3 lines here, and we're able to use the aqueducts to essentially bring that water 90 miles into the East Bay service territory, treat that water, and then send it out to the homes and businesses in our service area. Next slide. This is kind of an overview shot that shows a map of the area that we've been talking about. So what you'll see there is the McCullough River watershed. The McCullough River is the river that essentially, is the piece that drains into Party Reservoir. And then you'll see that it comes all the way down into the East Bay service area. You'll see a little fork off to the left there and a note that says Freeport Regional Water Facility, and that's in Sacramento. And that is what we call our straw north of the Delta, which enables us during dry years to basically take advantage of other water supplies in the state that are available to augment our snowmelt when the snowmelt is lower than we'd like it to be. And so actually the board did vote to make the decision, since we've had a dry year, to have those facilities be prepared to start bringing water into our system to make sure that we are ready to serve. Next slide. So what this slide shows is kind of a close-up of our service area. So you'll see the shaded area that kind of comprises from El Cerrito down through Oakland and Alameda. And that is our wastewater service area, which serves about 740,000 people. And those people receive both water and wastewater treatment services. The larger blue area, which of course includes the shaded area, is the area that we serve water in, and that serves 1.4 million people. In terms of the raw water systems, treatment systems, and distribution systems that we use to provide that service, we've got 5 local reservoirs. Some of you may have taken hikes around San Pablo or Lafayette. The treatment systems, we've got 6 different treatment plants. And in terms of our distribution system, we've got over 4,000 miles of pipe bringing water to homes and businesses, 122 pressure zones. That's a lot of pressure zones. We've got a lot of elevation and in our service area. And 164 reservoirs. Again, a lot of pressure zones and reservoirs for a water system that's serving a population of our size. We are the second largest retailer of water in the state of California after the city of Los Angeles's LADWP, Department of Water and Power. We again provide that wastewater service only to 740,000 people because we don't want to be pumping essentially that wastewater over the hills. That wouldn't be efficient. And so there are other wastewater treatment service providers providing service on the east side of kind of that ridge of hills that we're all probably pretty familiar with if you live in the Bay Area. Also on the wastewater side, I do want to add that we only provide treatment. So the lines that actually carry your wastewater from your home into our interceptors are owned by different entities. So we've got several satellites. The city of Berkeley owns its lines, city of Oakland owns its lines, and Steege Sanitary District serves many of you. The city of Piedmont has its lines, city of Emeryville has its lines. So and then the city of Richmond has its own wastewater treatment plant and its own collection system as well. Our main wastewater treatment plant is located at the base of the Bay Bridge. And as you're driving over sometime, if you take a look as you're going into San Francisco, it's on the left. Next slide. The facts that we have here are just some quick facts about EBMUD at a glance. So a lot of people don't know what the average cost of water is that we deliver to you, and it's about a penny. It's amazing. Those of you who buy water in jugs, either for picnics or for emergency supplies to be prepared for earthquakes, know that you're certainly paying more than 1 penny for that water. So great value. About 90% of our water, as I had said earlier, comes from the McCollum watershed, and about 10% comes from some of our local watershed lands, and that includes the watershed lands that some of you will be familiar with around San Pablo, Lafayette, et cetera. We do provide wastewater treatment for 50 million gallons a day. We have, again, more than 4,000 miles of pipe that we maintain, and more than 57,000 acres of watershed land that we manage on behalf of our public, which is phenomenal. And we do some of that in cooperation with East Bay Regional Parks, and we also have our own rangers and staff as well. In terms of the gallons of water that we deliver daily, it's about 150 million gallons. And on the, again, on the water side, 1.4 million customers, about 740,000 wastewater customers. Next slide. This is just a graphic that shows how big that number is when I say 4,200 miles of pipe. It would be the distance if we laid them end to end from the Oakland A's Stadium all the way to Wrigley Field and then all the way back again. So pretty phenomenal. Our staff working 24/7 to make that happen. Next slide. So here we just have a couple of shots where we essentially are showing our staff at work. So our work is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so our work is immediate. You've got some folks there fixing a leak in the rain. You can see that. Some other staff probably answering calls from customers or trying to figure out if somebody called in that there was a leak. There's someone taking a sample at a school faucet. We went and sampled all of the sort of faucets and fountains and at schools in our service area to make sure that they didn't have faucets and fountains that essentially had lead in it. And also EBMUD was the kind of lead agency to promulgate a law that was adopted in California to say, get the lead out of fixtures. All of these companies that are making fixtures and so on, you guys cannot have lead that would impact the health of our customers. That law was signed into into state law in California and later signed by President Obama into federal law, so that no fixtures in the country for sale legally have lead that would have impact public health. Shots there at the bottom show more of our operations staff at work. So we are always planning how are we going to protect the environment while meeting the needs of our service area during drought, for example, always planning to be ready for when the big one comes, because we know it is coming. Next slide. These are just some shots of some of our capital improvements. These are some critical improvements that we've completed in recent years. Work on our water treatment plants. I believe that one's Orinda. Work on neighborhood reservoirs. Work on pumping plants. So those of you that live at elevation are served by pumping plants. We need to be able to pump that water up to your home, and that's the elevation charge that those of you that live at elevation see on your bill. Work on our dam and outlet towers, and then work again on our aqueducts and large diameter pipelines. So our CIP is really your rate dollars at work. And we have several strategies that enable us to be effective with respect to prioritizing our infrastructure. We always are looking at safety, reliability, and water quality as our kind of primary drivers. But of course, we've got regulatory compliance, cost effectiveness, looking at our carbon footprint, working through completing master plans to understand what is effective, in terms of our strategic investments. And then also looking, of course, to make sure that we're being efficient and effective with our operations and maintenance. So all of this is used to inform how we should prioritize our spending on infrastructure. We'll just take a moment on our next slide to talk a little bit about our contract equity program, because investing in infrastructure isn't just about the projects. It also provides local employment through jobs at EBMUD and through our contractors that are working on projects with us. So you may see local residents working as flaggers, truck drivers, construction crews throughout our service area. And we work very hard to make sure that small, disadvantaged, minority, and LGBTQI businesses get a fair shot at our contracts through our award-winning contract equity program. Beverly Johnson's been running that for over 35 years. It provides opportunities for homegrown businesses. It provides local jobs. And what you'll see on this slide is that we've spent over the last 35 years more than $870 million in awards to diverse small businesses within our service area. And this is important to us. One thing that we like to say is that jobs like water keep our communities alive. And the purpose of our program is really to reflect the diversity of our service and impact areas, and to support the economic health and growth of our service area as well. Next slide. This is just a shot that we're hoping gives everyone a sense for our mission with respect to environmental stewardship. So we are very dedicated to environmental stewardship, from protecting our watershed to adapting to the results of climate change. We are, you see shots here of our some of the land that we protect with respect to our watersheds. You can see a solar project. We always look to evaluate if we've got sites that make sense for us to install solar. We are a large hydropower producer, and that's a shot of our Party Dam producing hydropower. On the left lower shot there, EBMUD Energy, that's a shot at our wastewater plant, where we have been able to, for many years now, produce 100% of our own power and even sell some of the excess power back to the grid. And then you'll see a shot there too of a salmon on our river. And folks might not know that the McCulmy River, while small, as a result of our stewardship, it can contribute 20 to 40% of the commercial salmon run in the state of California. So pretty phenomenal. And the work of our fisheries staff, folks might not know that we have our own fisheries team, is phenomenal work. Thank you. Next slide. So we did want to let the public know that the board has declared a stage 1 drought. That's a moderate drought, but the winter that we had this last year has been the second driest year on record for our McCulmy River Basin, and it's been the driest year that we've had on record for the East Bay. So we are asking that customers voluntarily reduce their water use as much as you can, up to 10%. and we are expanding information and rebates to help our customers conserve. So some of the information, as you reach out to our staff in water conservation, we have an award-winning programs and staff there. Things like the flume meter that many of you have seen that's for sale, that can let you know if you've got a leak instantaneously. It's got an app that goes on your phone. We've got smart irrigation systems that you can apply for rebates for. There are systems now that essentially use satellite information to essentially say, hey, you know what, it was kind of a cool and foggy day, let's ramp down the water use, and it does all that instantaneously. So those are some of the things that we're doing to help our customers. And then, on our operational side, as I had said on one of our earlier slides, we're preparing our Freeport facility to enable us to purchase water and bring that water into our service area. So we'll be bringing that down through the Sacramento River, and that's through partnerships with the state and with other agencies. So next slide. This just shows a slide that our board of directors saw when they were making decision with regards to how much water we were going to have in our reservoirs as we entered this year. And so you can see there from 2011 through the current 2021 year that we're definitely dry. You can look back to our last dry period in recent history, 2014, 2015, and you can see again that we bought supplemental supplies during that period. And so you can kind of see where we are at this point with respect to our projections on where we might be. So given the weather over the last couple of months, I know many of you have been concerned about the potential for drought, and that concern, obviously was warranted. And so yes, we will essentially be moving forward to purchase some water supplies this year. Next slide. So this shows our current drought management program guidelines. So again, normal rates are in effect, and so we are proposing rate increases that we'll talk about shortly. But there's not a drought surcharge at this point. So we are going to be purchasing supplies, and those are more costly, obviously, than snowmelt that doesn't have a cost. But we have built that into our costs, and we are prepared to pay for those costs without charging our customers more during stage 1 drought. If we were to move to a stage 2 drought, there is a drought surcharge that could be triggered of up to 8% on top of the then in place charges. And then stage 3 and stage 4 have more drought surcharge percentages, so up to 20% and up to 25% again, reflecting our costs to serve, and then also in fact providing an incentive for folks to conserve water. Next slide. We'll go over the recommended budget at this point. So moving on, what you see here are our budget priorities, which, as I've stated previously, are to continue our investments in and maintenance of our aging infrastructure, and to continue to plan for and implement long-term financial stability. So our strategic plan helps guide our decisions, establish priorities about what work we're going to carry out during a 2-year period. Next slide. So when we look at the challenges that we're facing, and when we were making decisions about what would go in this next 2-year budget, we were looking again at the aging infrastructure, rising costs that we're all seeing, regulatory compliance, recovery from the pandemic, seismic hazards, and then the changing climate. Next slide. So one thing that I like to point out when I'm given the opportunity to talk about costs of water are that in our case, our operations costs are fixed, but our revenues are not. So there are some water agencies around the nation who essentially buy water. And so people use less water, they have less cost. But in our case, because we have this marvelous system, essentially what you see in the background behind me, of watershed lands where we have this snow that melts down, and comes down into our surface area primarily by gravity, there's not as strong of a correlation there. So close to 95% of our costs are fixed, and only about 5% of our costs are variable with respect to pumping, chemicals, and so on. And again, we have this incredible high quality water. I know that those of you that live here know that when you go to other parts of the state, the Central Valley, Southern California, and you take a drink of water from the faucet, you think, ooh, I'm definitely not home. Well, that has a cost, because we have all of that infrastructure that we have to maintain, regardless of how much water is sold or not. However, because we want to make sure to provide a strong signal to our customers with respect to conservation, we are in the Western United States. This is dry territory. We bring in about 70% of our revenue on the variable side through our variable charges, and under 30% essentially on the fixed monthly charges. Next slide. So when we looked at this year's budget approach, the three themes that really guided us were being cautious, being realistic, and being flexible. So cautious, because we needed to consider the pandemic's impacts on our regional economy, on individuals many of whom have had pay cuts, job losses. We needed to look at water sales collection. Currently, there's a moratorium on any kind of water shutoffs. And so there are a lot of people that have been unable to pay their bills, but obviously we've continued to provide them with water supply. So all of those are things that we needed to build in. We also needed to be realistic. And so in light of many of the things that I've talked about, we looked at reevaluating our spending, our priorities, our strategies. And then with respect to flexibility, we wanted to make sure that we would be able to adapt to whatever the environment would be as we move forward into the next 2 years, but still allowing us to move forward with some of the critical work and critical projects that we've identified. Next slide. So what you'll see here is kind of a pie chart of our actual budget. Close to 85% of our total $2.25 billion budget over the next 2 years will be for water related costs, and about 15% will be for our wastewater related costs. When we break that down between capital and operations, what you see there is the capital appropriation a little over 40%, and then debt service or our mortgage at about 22%. So about 2/3 of our budget is really capital, and it's investments in infrastructure. Some of you might wonder, why is it that you have a mortgage? Why do you choose to have a mortgage rather than paying for cash? Wouldn't it be better to pay for cash rather than paying interest? So one, I would say that we fortunately are able to borrow at tax exempt rates, and so those are very low. The second is that what it does is it allows us to keep our rates a little bit lower if we are debt financing some of that infrastructure, and that secondly, it allows for intergenerational equity. So when we put something in place, as you've seen, some of that pipe, for example, is still in service 150 years later, and so it enables the next generation of families that live in the house next door to participate in paying for that infrastructure that will serve for a very long time. Next slide. So this is just a quick slide that covers our 5-year capital improvement program on the water and wastewater side. On the water side, over 5 years, we'll have spent $2 billion on improvements to our water system, and about $250,000 on the wastewater side. Next slide. So these are some highlights from our water system capital improvement program, or CIP, as we like to call it in our industry. So again, there'll be over $115 million that's spent on distribution pipe replacement. So you'll see our men and women out in the streets in front of your house, maybe in front of your business, although some of you might not want them to be right in front of your business. Over $110 million in water treatment plants, and over $45 million on large diameter pipeline replacements. So again, beneath our local streets in the East Bay, there's this network of distribution pipes, and much of it's cast iron, some of it's steel, some of it's cement, and many again are from the 20s, 40s, and again, as I said earlier, some of them dating back to the late 1800s. So we are very focused on making sure that we are ready to serve for the next 100 years. Next slide. On the wastewater side, the $250 million that I had mentioned earlier, broken up roughly kind of the big pieces, 25 million on treatment plant improvements, over 18 million on interceptors and pump stations, and 14 million on secondary process of our wastewater treatment. You might have heard the term primary and secondary treatment. Primary treatment is essentially just taking out, kind of some of the big things that might get stuck. If your kid flushes their toy down the toilet or something, that would come out in primary treatment. And the secondary treatment is a biological process that enables us to further clean what's coming down to us through our interceptors. Next slide. So now we're going to jump into the section of this presentation where we talk about our recommended rates of charges. Next slide. So we have had a number of rate increases over the last couple of years. So when you look back from fiscal year 18, 19, 20, and 21, what you'll see is 9.25, 9, 6.5, 6.5, and 6.25 there. So what you'll see then is moving forward for fiscal years 22 and 23, we previously had projected that we would be at 5% for those years. And we in fact are proposing at this point that the board adopt rate increases of 4% and 4%. So that's 20% lower in each of those years than we had previously projected. And the reasons for that are that we are cognizant of what has gone on in our service area, and we understand what's going on nationally. And we've been able to look at several good years in the past, strong management that's enabled us to have some savings, and essentially said, let's incorporate that into these next 2 years. On the wastewater side, our projection for the wastewater rates had been at 4% and 4%, and we're coming in right on target with respect to what we said 2 years ago. Next slide. I do want to let anyone that's listening know that our rates are based on cost of service, and that's really important. We make sure that our operating and capital expenditures are planned to ensure reliable service. We also make sure that we are always in compliance with California's Proposition 218, which is now part of the California Constitution, Articles 13 C and D. And essentially, rates being based on cost of service mean that expenses are allocated to customers based on use and use characteristics, so that we're making sure that everybody's paying their fair share. A recent review of our rates found it to be in full compliance with law, which we're very, of course, happy to have that affirmation. Also want to let you know that we hold the highest credit rating possible from Standard & Poor's, AAA, both on the water and the wastewater side. And we're very proud of that. And it also enables us to borrow funds as part of our capital program, keeping rates low, and making sure that we've got intergenerational equity. We're able to do that at the lowest rates possible. Next slide. So this is just sort of a graphic that shows a cup of glass for water service and a sewer manhole cover for wastewater service. And it's trying to answer the question graphically, where do your rate dollars go? So on the water side, about half of it's going for infrastructure improvement. 32 cents for water service, 8 cents for administration, 4 cents for customer service, 3 cents for natural resources management, 2 for regulatory compliance. It's fairly similar on the wastewater side with, again, 44 cents, almost half going for infrastructure improvements. You've got, again, 2 cents there for customer service, 7 cents for administration, 12 cents for environmental and regulatory compliance, and then about 35 cents there for wastewater treatment operations. Next slide. So this just shows a breakout of our actual budget. And the main message here is that our revenue requirements really drive our rates. And so again, the rate increases that are proposed, 4% on the water side for both FY22 and 23. You can see our operations and debt service budgeted amounts, what we paid during this last year, what we had budgeted during this last year for FY21, and what we're proposing at this point for fiscal year 22. So we've got our expenses, and then we've got our revenues. So we've got rate revenues, a little bit there in non-rate revenues, some proceeds from bonds, because again, we're selling bonds capital as part of financing our capital improvements. Again, we're using cash, and I said that, noted that we are using some cash rather than increasing rates, and we think that's the right decision. And then that sort of difference, whatever's left over, is what we put into our rate model to essentially derive our rates. Next slide. With respect to how our water kind of rates and charges actually break down, what you'll see here is that we've got a water flow charge. So that's dollars per CCF or 100 cubic feet. The CCF is centum cubic feet, so centum being the Latin for 100, and 100 cubic feet, so 1 CCF is 748 gallons. And that rate ranges from $4.42 per CCF to $8.03 per CCF, depending on which tier the usage is in. And so some folks have said, well, why can't you just charge one amount for all of that usage? And the answer is, well, you know, some agencies do that, and we could do that. But what this does is it reflects our cost of service, which is that during peak summer months when we are providing a lot of water for folks who want to do a lot of outdoor irrigation, essentially we had to upsize our treatment plants, and we essentially had to build more infrastructure and make sure that there's more water available essentially to be able to meet those needs. And so our rate structure and that tiered rate structure essentially reflects that increase in cost. Our service charge is the fixed charge that we charge on a monthly basis to be connected to the system. And that's at this point, $28.98 per month for your kind of average single family residential meter size. And then we also have, for those that live at elevation, and so that's about 40% of our customers, 40 to 50%, an elevation surcharge. And that surcharge essentially pays for the additional pumping, for the actual pumps themselves and for the energy to pump up that water. You know, a Prius weighs something, you know, I don't know, 3,000 pounds or something like that. And so keep that in mind when you think about how many Priuses we might be having to pump up to your house, and essentially the delivery charge to do that. So what you'll see in the pie chart there is where our revenue comes from. So again, 66%, 2/3 of it coming from the water flow charge, the service charge making up, you know, about 29%, and then the elevation surcharge, a relatively small amount there at 34 million, 5%. Next slide. So this is a breakdown of our actual monthly bill. So the service charge at the $28.98, so you would get one of those every month. And then depending on your usage, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, as I just described earlier. So this is for our average user. And I do want to point out that our average user and our median user are not the same statistically. So for those of you that are into statistics. And so more than 50% of our customers actually use less than 8 CCF per month. But we do have many folks that have very large gardens, want to do outdoor watering, and so our average is a little higher there at 8. So whereas the median is more like 6, the average is 8. So for this average user at 8, we have tier 1 use 7 units and tier 2 use 1 unit. And so you've got that $30.94 and then $6.08 for that one additional unit. And so you add those 3 pieces up together and you end up with a total average monthly bill of $66. And again, this is the projected bill for FY22 compared to the current bill at $63.47. So you might say, Sophia, why do you not have any elevation charge there? And the answer is, again, because most of our customers live in zone 1, and zone 1 has no elevation surcharge. And again, that's because we're bringing that water down from the Sierra Nevadas, right? And so that's coming down to us by gravity. And so that's the beauty of a lot of our water, which is just carbon neutral. Amazing stuff. So I'm wondering, I don't know how much water you think you use. You might take a moment to think about that. But the average family uses about 200 gallons of water per day. So if you think about those Home Depot buckets, those orange ones, imagine going down to the river and getting 40 of those every day for your family. You probably wouldn't be doing a lot else that day. I also want to point out that a bottle of smart water that you can buy at the grocery store costs $1.70. And so for about that same price, our average home is waking up in the morning, making a pot of coffee, taking a shower, brushing their teeth, throwing in a load of laundry, and watering their plants. And that's all before they start work. We really believe that we are providing a great value at somewhere $2.25 on a daily basis for your family to have high quality, reliable water supply. Next slide. So this again shows kind of a range of bills: a low water user, an average user, and a high water user. So a low user is paying currently just shy of $45 a month, and that's going to be going up to $46.66 and then $48.54 if the proposed rate increases go into effect. You see the bill there for the average user that we've already talked about, and then a very high water user at 24 CCF per month is paying currently $172.03, and that would go up at the end of the 2 years. It would be $186.02. Next slide. So this shows for our wastewater system, we covered the same chart for our water system. So again, same proposed 4% and 4% increases for the next 2 years for wastewater. Shows again that breakdown: operations, debt service, our capital investments for the total expenses. We take our budgeted wastewater revenue, we subtract our non-water rate, actually this should say wastewater rate revenue, I apologize, revenues, and then any proceeds from bonds for capital. We draw down some cash reserves, again, because we believe that's the right thing to do. And we end up with that net revenue requirement, which again goes into our rate model and produces the rates. Moving on to the next slide. With respect to our East Bay MUD wastewater rate structure, we've got a treatment flow charge. And again, that's per CCF to collect and discharge essentially our wastewater. And then we have our treatment strength charge, and that's the charge essentially to remove the solids. And then we've got our service charge, which is a fixed monthly charge for our customer related costs essentially, and then a wet weather facility charge. And so let's just talk a little bit more about all of these. So I remember early when I started working in rates and charges, somebody described, imagine a glass of water and somebody puts in a teaspoon of sugar and a teaspoon of sand, and you swirl it all up. Well, that's the glass that essentially is coming to us for treatment. And so we are charging you based on how much water's in that glass, so a flow amount. And then we're also charging you based on how much of that sugar that we need, methanogens, bacteria. They're an ancient bacterial form that essentially eats up that sugar and turns it into methane, which we use to create the energy. And then we also have to have infrastructure that removes that sand, right? So we're removing the sugar, we're removing the sand, and we're treating that wastewater so that we can put it back out into the bay and in a way that is environmentally friendly and that meets all state and federal regulations with regards to that discharge. So then there's this last piece, which is the wet weather facilities discharge. Well, what happens is that during wet weather, while we normally treat 50, 60 million gallons a day of wastewater, during wet weather, all of a sudden the big rainstorm comes in. We can see 10 times that amount of water at our wastewater treatment plant. And that's because there's so many cracks in people's laterals, and even in some of the collection systems that are owned by the cities and other satellite agencies that we work with. So that's one of the reasons why if you buy or sell a home in the East Bay, why you're required essentially to repair your lateral and make sure that it's in good working condition. Essentially what this does is it helps us work over time with our satellites and work on our infrastructure to be able to try to accommodate that high increase in wastewater flow, which is mainly infiltration rainwater that basically makes its way into the cracks as the kind of groundwater table rises and as water infiltrates down into the system. So both of those together. So that water creeps into our system. It shows up. We've got big holding facilities. We hold as much as we can and filter it back into our biological system. As you might imagine, biology can't grow 10 times overnight to be able to deal with that. And then if it just is more than we can accommodate, it's a huge storm, then we do partial treatment of that wastewater and essentially it's partially treated wastewater and we release that into the bay. All right, next slide. Okay, so over here we have the single family residential wastewater bill, and this is a monthly breakdown again. The service charge at $7.59 per month. The treatment flow charges $1.37 per CCF, and then a treatment strength charge of $7.90 again per CCF, kind of converted based on the average loading from a single family residential home, and then a small 20-cent per month Bay pollution prevention discharge, and that funds things like the insert in the East Bay Times. Many of you will have seen about wastewater and some of the billboards that you might see about wastewater through the service area. So we do kind of have a limit of how much we charge. There's a maximum essentially that you would pay as a single family residence on wastewater. And you might say, gosh, why? I mean, there's no limit on the water side. And the reason is, as you might imagine, we're not trying to charge you for the water that you're using to water your garden. We're just trying to charge you for what actually comes to us for the most part. So that's why there's a limit here. All right, next slide. So what you see here is, again, the range of bills for a low, average, and then that maximum charge that I was talking about, that 9 CCF. And so you can see after the increases that we're proposing, the low water user would pay $22 a month up to $29 per month. Now, when we get into what an actual bill looks like, what you'll see is you might think, gosh, this feels lower than what I see on my bill when I look at, that $65 and then this is, $25 roughly. And the answer is because, again, we don't control the charges of the city of Oakland or city of Berkeley or any of those other entities. All right, next slide. So that wet weather facilities charge that we talked about, that's collected on the property tax bill. So that actually doesn't show up on your bi-monthly bill. And if you're a small lot under 5,000 square feet, your bill currently is $115 a year, and that'll be going up to about $125 at the end of the period that we're looking at rates and charges for. A medium lot under 10,000 square feet, essentially up to $195 on an annual basis, and then a large lot paying close to $450. Next slide. So how do we stack up when we look at other water agencies? And so what you'll kind of see here is that if you kind of look from anywhere from DSRSD to East Bay MUD, or even through Livermore, we're all kind of, pretty close to each other. So our goal is to kind of be in the middle of the pack. We don't want to be over that. For many years we were in the top third of this chart, and we definitely have come down. We have seen during this last year, we chose to move forward with rate increases last year that had already been adopted. Many agencies elected not to increase rates last year, and so many of them do have higher rate increases that are going to be moving forward in the next 2 years. So this may bring us down again a little bit here. Next slide. On the wastewater side, what you'll see there is that East Bay MUD looks like it's very high on this list when we compare to peers. And again, that reason is because the only piece that we control is that blue piece, that $407 per year. That green piece, which is sort of an average of all of our service area collection system providers, is not a piece that we control. Next slide. So this is a shot of our actual bill. So this is what comes to your house 6 times a year. Again, I do want to note that it is 6 times a year. I've had folks say to me, hey, your bill is as high as my PG&E bill. And I say, well, that means we're half of PG&E, right? Because PG&E comes every month and ours is every 2 months. So just so you know, again, we are billing every 2 months. When did we start doing that? We started doing it during World War II. And apparently it was kind of a resource savings idea, save paper, for the war effort, essentially. And so we've continued to do that. So what you'll see here is the charges that we've talked about. You'll see the billing period, is it 60 days, 59 days, 63 days? What were those days? And then you'll see kind of on the bottom piece, after it shows the water charges and so on. This is a bill for Richmond in this case. And so again, there's no wastewater charges on this bill because City of Richmond has its own wastewater plant and collection system, and they bill separately for that. On the bottom sort of third of this bill, what you'll see there is your current usage. So there's kind of the current reading on your meter, the previous reading on the meter, and the difference is what you're paying, so that you see there's 16 units, that's 16 CCF. centum cubic feet. And essentially, if you divide that by 2, that's 8. So that's what we were saying is the average use, that roughly 200 gallons per day. And then what you'll see there is, oh, this is how much I used last year during that period. Okay, my use has been consistent. And so if you look on the far right, that shows you what your gallons per day is. Last year I was using 187 gallons per day, and now I'm 198 gallons per day. So that's when you look at this bill, what you're seeing. Next slide. What this bill shows here, I'm trying to figure out why this one is different. Oh, this is a bill for Alameda. So again, on this bill is we see the wastewater charges. So as I had said, in Richmond, no wastewater charges. In Alameda, you would see again the wastewater treatment charges. So that's the difference between these two. All right, next slide. So this is a bill for Danville, which is a community that tends to have larger lots, is warmer. And so what you'll see here then is, again, that higher usage. And so that higher usage, you can see down in the bottom third, 32 units on a bi-monthly basis. So again, these folks are using 16 units. So it's about twice what the average single family home is using in the area. And so again, that higher usage translating into a higher bill. Next slide. So we do know that water is essential, and we recognize that not everyone has sufficient means to be able to, pay for everything that we need to pay for here in the Bay Area. And so East Bay MUD does have a customer assistance program. It's one of the oldest and most generous customer assistance programs for water in the state of California and in the nation. We provide for up to a 50% reduction on water flow and charges, and up to a 35% reduction on our wastewater flow and charges for qualifying customers. Of course, there's a limit to the amount of water per person that's living in the household. It is also adjusted by income. So if there are more people in the household, that income limit to qualify goes up. And we definitely also offer payment plan extensions. We want to help you if you need additional time to pay your bill. Please contact us. If you think that you know anyone that might be eligible for the CAP program, even if you're not sure, please have them reach out to us. We want to help if we can. So we also have other ways that we can assist, and we've got lots of conservation tools and rebates at eastbaymud.com/watersmart. We have rebates that can help save you water both indoors and outdoors. I talked about the flume. We talked about some of the new systems, like the Ratio, that essentially takes the current weather data in your area and feeds that back into your irrigation system. We've got leak alerts that you can sign up for online. We have My Water Report that we send out periodically if you sign up under our WaterSmart designation. And we also hold virtual events on gardening, dry gardening, ways that you can be smart with respect to kind of what plants you pick and how you care for them, looking at trees versus other types of gardening as well. So we really would encourage you to please go to our website. We've got lots of resources, and we have fantastic people here that want to help. Next slide. So with regards to a summary and next steps, next slide, we've got a 2-year budget appropriation of $2.25 billion that we will be taking to our board of directors. Again, 2/3 of that is capital investment related. And again, our budget priorities continue to be the investment in and maintenance of our aging infrastructure, along with continuing our plans for long-term financial stability. Again, those proposed rates are 4% and 4% in years FY22 and FY23. So starting July 1 this year is FY22, and those are 20% less than we had forecasted in both of those years from when we looked at this 2 years ago. And on the wastewater side, we're right on target where we said that we would be at 4% and 4% for the next 2 fiscal years. Next slide. Our schedule. Well, we had our first budget workshop in January. We had a second budget workshop in March. And we made the decision, our board made the decision to issue approval of our Proposition 218 notice. Those of you that are on this call may have learned about this particular event through our Proposition 218 notice. Please let us know, of course, if you have feedback, any thoughts about ways that we can make it better or easier to understand any of that. We mailed those Proposition 218 notices to homes and businesses in April. And essentially May 11th, coming up here next week, we will be presenting our biennial report and recommendation of the general manager for fiscal years 22 and 23 to the board of directors. We will be holding a public hearing as noticed in our Proposition 218 notice on June the 8th, and the board will consider adoption of the budget and rates along with the schedule of potential drought surcharges if the drought continued for through past this year and into future years. And again, if those rates and the budget were passed, they would go into effect on July the 1st of this summer. Next slide. So again, that proposed hearing date is June the 8th. This is a shot of the 218 notice, and you can find out more about our budget on our website at eastbaymud.com/rates. Next slide. Within the Proposition 218 notice, if you don't already have it, you can get it from our website. You'll see there how you can submit a protest to our board if you feel that these rates and charges, despite everything that I've tried to share with you today, if you still feel that you are in opposition to these rates and charges, you may mail those before the public hearing date. And this has got information about our PO box where you should put that in, and exactly all the information that needs to be included essentially for that to be considered a valid protest by our board of directors. If more than 50% of our public essentially submit a protest, the board would not impose the rate increases. Next slide. So resources again are available at eastbaymud.com/rates. We've got our information about kind of our rates and charges on there, a little bit about our cost of service, a little bit of a simplified kind of description of that process and how it works. And there are some videos of workshops and presentations that we've held that may be helpful. Next slide. So this is the time when we get to let you ask questions. So let's dig into questions. This is one of the pieces of infrastructure that we use to dig. We do believe that water continues to be the best value around, and East Bay MUD's water is some of the best in the state and in the nation. For more information, please visit us at eastbaymud.com. Consider following us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Nextdoor. As always, you can also reach out to any of us that are on this call directly. We want to help get you the answers that you need. Thank you so much.
Sophia, we have one question in the chat, and I did want to mention that our General Manager, Clifford has joined us.
Sounds like a good idea.
So the first question is, are there any planned water projects that address California's drought? Are there plans to enact drought surcharge this year and next year? I think we went over it a little bit.
Clifford, do you want to talk about water projects?
Sure. I mean, so, Mona, as you mentioned, Sophia answered the question about the drought rates for this year. As far as water supply projects, we're working on an expansion of Los Vaqueros Reservoir. That's Contra Costa Water District's reservoir. They want to expand it from 160,000 acre feet to 275,000 acre feet. This is a regional project, so many utilities are looking at joining this project. East Bay MUD, we're interested in that project to add 30,000 acre feet of additional drought supplies. We're also working out in the San Joaquin County on a groundwater project where we can store water in the ground when we have excess water that we can extract during dry years as well. And then of course we have lots of projects to continue to do water conservation. Our customers have currently achieved 46 million gallons per day of conservation. Our goal is to get to 70 million gallons per day by 2050. And then we have many recycled water projects currently that are active, and others that we're working on to diversify our portfolio of water supplies. So many projects to make us more drought resistant.
So to continue that question, I know that you guys said we're in a stage 1 drought right now. What are the next steps to declare it, to declare a stage 2 or stage 3?
Yeah, to get to further levels, I mean, we'll have to see, what, there's still a certain amount of snow in the mountains and it's melting right now. So we'll see how much of that water ends up into the river and then to our reservoirs. But I think the big one is what next year is going to look like. If next year is another dry winter, our storage will be further depleted. And then we would move to progressively more severe stages of drought.
Thank you.
All right, we have another question. Have forest fires and air particulates had any impact on your operations and costs?
Clifford, I think you should go ahead and answer as former manager of our our operations group.
Yeah, I mean, the forest fires, I mean, fortunately for our watershed, it's it's protected, it's mostly rock. And so the fires themselves don't affect it. There may be some, particularly on the reservoir. It doesn't affect our treatment too much. So I think to answer your question, overall, in the big picture, not a huge impact on our costs. There are costs associated with how we respond and the type of work that we can do, but nothing significant that that would impact our budget that much.
And we have a thank you. And are there any more questions? I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. And we will have another presentation this evening, pretty much the same one at 6 p.m. in case you were so excited that you want to hear it again. So we will be here again at 6 p.m. The recording of the presentation will be posted to the website probably by the end of next week. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.